you for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me here. I'm super excited to chat to the people about how we can be using crates and everything about confinement. So I'll let you kick us off.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, welcome and thank you to everyone who's joining us this evening. So we're just going to be here just to share a little bit about our collaboration together and what we sort of hope to achieve together as two small businesses that have a love for dogs. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Gemma from the Pet Carpenter, and typically behind the scenes. So Harry's chucked me in the deep end here tonight for our first live, but we're specialists in creating bespoke handcrafted furniture for pets. And as I said, delighted to be joined by Karishma today, and I'll just invite her to tell you a little bit more about herself and Calm Canine Academy.
Yeah, first of all, we're all going to give Gemma some like emojis, drop some hearts there. Your first ever live stream with so many people. This is a big deal. So you're smashing it. And I'll introduce myself a little bit. My name is Karishma. So I'm a multi-certified dog trainer and behavior consultant and co-founder of Calm Canine Academy. So CCA, if you've heard of us, we're an online community and a dog training platform. And our job is to empower guardians, so that's you guys, with the tools and knowledge that you need to support your dog's behavior and wellness. So we're kind of like a modern day dog training, you know, think like we're moving away from Cesar Milan, we're coming into the 21st century, right? So we offer private and group coaching programs. We specialize in topics like fear, reactivity, hyperactivity, and separation anxiety, which is really important, I think, around this topic. So excited to dive into that. And our services are 100% virtual. So we work with guardians all over the world, and our focus is on giving you what you need to work with your dog to transform their health and behavior. So we've worked now with over 5,000 dog human teams in over 16 countries. And so our community continues to grow. We're super excited to be partnering with the Pet Carpenter. We don't usually partner, but we love when it just feels right. And there's like such a lovely vibe around the Pet Carpenter, I think, which is why so many people are here. So we're really happy and very grateful to be here. So yeah, thank you for having us, Gemma.
No, thank you, Karishma. And I think there's been some work behind the scenes, but you know, I think we've each followed each other for some time and just have some good synergy and shared values. So I think that's what's really exciting about sort of starting on this journey together. So just for those of you who might be newer to the Pet Carpenter, I just thought I'd do a little bit of an introduction to who we are, and especially if anybody's joined us from CCA tonight. So we began from really small beginnings. Harry, in fact, is my brother also, and he actually built his first piece of pet furniture during lockdown. So he was a carpenter by trade, lost all his work, and built the first piece in his dining room with his 3-month-old baby in the background. And since then, it just grew from there, and the Pet Carpenter was born. So a sort of really exciting journey that we've been on. And really, it's all sort of come from the fact that we have seen value in the crate space in our home. I myself, with Finn, who features a lot in our content, he always looks very restful. You know, he was in a crate from puppyhood, and actually never wanted to leave it. Essentially, I got rid of the metal crate in the end because I didn't like it. But he's just naturally gone back into wanting that kind of space. Theo, who's Harry's dog, he interestingly has found the crate really useful when Harry's children came along. So he's got 2 young toddlers, and it's just been a space where he can relax and go to and have as his own, and also to teach children those boundaries as well of when Theo needs his time out. So that's been sort of hugely vital there. And then most recently, our parents rescued a dog called Loki from Spain. Again, some of you might have seen him on our social media, and it really, like, interestingly, he's just seen the crate as an absolute sanctuary, and ever since he came into the home, it's been his place where he takes things. He'll steal stuff and take it to it, but he really sees it as a safe space, and especially when he's nervous, like new people around the home, it's a really kind of vital space to have in the home to help him and people that are around. So that's where it came from. And ultimately, as I said at the beginning, the metal crate wasn't something we loved. It was, interestingly, a friend of ours who came to us and said, can you build this. Harry built it in the dining room. It went from there, and we were just like, actually, there's real value in bringing this to people. So yeah, so whilst we are experts in creating bespoke furniture for people, and bringing all sorts of amazing designs to life, we've always been really mindful that yes, we love the crate. We're not specialists in crate training. We've never put ourselves out to be there as that, but we understand in terms of sizing. But beyond that, that's where actually this partnership feels really exciting to have Karishma, Calm Canine Academy on board to really kind of explore that a bit more deeply and be on hand to kind of to our community, not just for crate training, but actually for other training needs that are out there. So I'm just going to take that into looking at discussing boundaries, confinement, crate space, from Karishma, because I think she is the expert in the room. And we'll just go through, we've lined up some sort of questions that I'm going to just ask Karishma, and hopefully she's going to be able to kind of come back and just explain a little bit more about those. So Karishma, when we talk about crate space, confinement, containment training, like what do we even mean by this?
I think this is the best place to start, because immediately in my head, when I think of a crate, have so many negative connotations that immediately spring into my mind. Like, I think about shelters, I think about dogs that are in cages, I think about distressed dogs often, and I do not want anyone to think about that as what we're discussing. We're not talking about the way that these things have been used in the past. We are using them very much in a way that's collaborative with the animal, and the focus is on the comfort of the animal and on using it to improve the relationship, their well-being, etc. So I love how the Pet Carpenter have like sort of rebranded this in a way, because like, number one, you call them like doggy bedrooms, and that's how I think of them. Like, in my head, they're little doggy bedrooms. Like, when I get overstimulated, I like to go up to my room and like close the curtains and have a little space that's mine. And I really think about it in this similar way. But I also like to kind of expand the conversation. Crates is one thing that we often use. We also maybe use gates. Like, I'm sure that you've maybe put a baby gate up in front of things, or had a dog on a leash. Like, all of these are different forms of containment, confinement, boundaries. Boundaries are not bad.
Yeah.
Initially, they can be good, but when they're used coercively, especially when we're dealing with like captive animals, that's when it becomes problematic. So I think the kind of nuanced conversation that we're having these days in modern welfare-based training circles is around like, how can we use these tools that are in a way that completely get rid of any sort of abusive part that they might have had, or sort of association with bad welfare, and how do we kind of build and create this new way of doing it with our dogs. So it's all about cooperation and enhancing their well-being as they cohabit with humans. And you mentioned just a few examples there for your family of ways that crates have been really, really beneficial. And I think that's making sure that we think about it as cooperative, and we think about it as a conversation with the animal, and not something that's out of their hands and that they have no choice or control over. That's like the key difference and about what we're going to be talking about today. So I think that kind of starts us off maybe, and puts the scene a little bit.
I think that's some really like amazing points, and it's funny when I sort of reflect, because we do get negative comments on social media. And I remember when we first outset in our business, it was something that we were really nervous about, because it was like, actually we felt like there was probably more negative than there was positive initially. But I think it's just, as we've grown, we're fortunate now to have a community that really understands the positive benefits of using the crate space or confinement and those types of things. And now I sort of see these comments as an opportunity to really actually explain why we believe in that space, and for it that we'd never encourage it to be used in a negative way, and actually it's a positive tool that you can use in the home. So
I love that just change from being curious and an opportunity for us to like learn more. Because listen, I get it, I have I can get really triggered by certain imagery as well. And when we see animals are behind bars, it doesn't feel good sometimes. And initially we have this like, whoa, what's going on here? Impulse. So I'm similarly quite like empathetic and open towards people who have that response. I'm like, great, you're an empathetic person. Hello, nice to meet you. Love that. My whole business is about that. Like my whole job is about, and so is yours. Your whole job is about creating like beautiful things that are useful and benefit both humans and dogs. Pretty cool. And we all ultimately actually are on the same page. But having these conversations is what helps us bridge those gaps, so that folks can ask questions. Like we've given folks the opportunity to ask a lot of different questions, and we'll dive more into kind of the details. But yeah, just opening up with that, like this is like, or I always want these conversations to be very open-hearted, warm, safe space. The internet does not promote that at all. But that's okay. That's cool. We're here to like, we're just here to spread good things and help animals, and definitely not cause any harm. And I guess we can dive into some of the details around that together.
Definitely. So obviously we've had a little bit of an introduction, but you know, what benefits like to create training and boundaries for like a dog's actual health and well-being, what sort of do you perceive, or you know, from your learning?
100%. This is something that's not discussed enough, I don't think. I think people get nervous about discussing it because exactly of what you said around the kind of backlash that can happen. But here are some examples, many of which every single dog will experience sort of some version of this in their lifetime. So for example, injuries or sickness. If we have a dog who is unwell or has injured themselves, they might need to be confined. Or if your dog ever goes in for surgery or overnight vet stays, they are always confined in a crate or a kennel type environment. So a benefit of getting your dog comfy with some version of confinement is preparing them for those eventualities, right? Which is going to happen. It's an if, not when. Sorry, it's a when, not if situation. It's going to happen to those dogs at some point, right? So even just that in itself kind of touches every single animal, every single pet dog, and is enough for me to just kind of go, oh, but I will continue because there are many others. Number two that I think is really commonly used is for car travel. So the safest way to travel with a dog is in a crate. Long distances especially can be very comfortable for them, can shield them from having to see whatever is outside the car. And also we know that it's the safest in many cases. By no means do I only ever use crates in cars, but like if they are often crash tested, and you can be sure if there's a collision that your dog's going to be safe. So traveling, and in many countries, I know that we're both in the UK, and but I know that we probably have folks tuning in from quite a lot of different places, and in some places there are quite frequently emergency evacuations because of climate stuff, and almost always those animals, if they are involved in something like that, are created. And for us at CCA, like I said, we've worked with clients in 16 countries, so we have these things in our head. We're okay, these are important kind of skills that we can give our dogs. So that's just kind of the more practical side. But we can then shift to a behavior and welfare and relationship kind of side as well. So our dogs are well, they do a lot of things that we don't really love that much, and that's extremely developmentally appropriate and species appropriate, especially at certain points in their development, right? So we might have a very young dog, dogs in adolescence, or even senior dogs, and dogs who are experiencing physiological changes, behaviors that we see: food stealing, destructive behavior, maybe managing relationships with other dogs, dog-child safety. These are the kind of extremely normal, everyday challenges that most dogs will experience, and we can use confinement and crating in some way to help them out. So getting them comfy, settling in a little den like area that's comfortable, there's access to water, means that you can have that steak dinner without wrestling the 7-month-old puppy down from the table. And it feels like sometimes people go, I don't want to remove their freedoms. But sometimes, as we go through developmental stages, we're not ready for certain freedoms. Like if you have a 2-year-old, for example, you probably are not able to just leave them in the kitchen unattended, because if it's anything like 2-year-olds I know, there will be chaos and a lot of terrible things could happen, and we have to be aware of their developmental cognitive limits, right?
Yeah.
So I think one thing that folks don't realize is that, you know, a 1-year-old dog is still in the middle of adolescence.
Yeah.
They're going to start doing all sorts of crazy stuff. I say it to my clients all the time. They're like, oh, he's 2, he wouldn't do that. And I'm like, he's like 16. I tried a whole bunch of new stuff. At 16, I was trying a whole bunch of new stuff, and my parents didn't expect that. They didn't expect that either. It's normal.
Yeah.
And rather than constantly running around trying to play behavior whack-a-mole, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, we can create these spaces for them which provide an opportunity for them to just like learn a different thing from the offset and not even have to rehearse a whole bunch of stuff that they don't like. So that's just, we're talking about every dog, then we're talking about like sort of welfare and behavior sort of things as they go through their life. And then us at CCA, so we specialize with sensitive dogs who maybe struggle with behavior challenges, so things like hyperactivity, dogs that literally struggle to relax, to calm down, to sleep the amount of that they should be, dogs who struggle with sound sensitivity and who can't find safe places in the home where they don't feel like they're being threatened in some way. Fear, there's a lot of fear in sort of, especially not even just rescue dogs, we're experiencing fear and kind of reactivity a lot more than we used to, and providing a little safe space for them when the kids have friends over, when there's a guest coming over or something like that, somewhere safe for them to be, can be super helpful. And lastly, with any sort of aggression or lungy, barky, snappy, bitey behaviors, which is what's an area we specialize in, crates can be an absolute lifesaver for families who really need management in often really small spaces. So a fun fact about our team is that we specialize in work in cities, especially. So I spent the first 5 years of my career in New York, and now I've been in London for 3 years. And so I'm used to dealing with the resource guarding Great Pyrenees on the 50th floor in Manhattan, in a 1-bedroom apartment. And I mean, there are all these questions about whether that dog should be there in the first place, obviously. But what I'm saying is that in these special cases, especially, crates can actually be the thing that keeps animals in the home sometimes, especially if they become this safe space for them that they really love and enjoy. So I kind of ranted at you there, but there's, as you can see, I can think of so many different areas and ways that it's effective for some very niche dogs, but then also for like every single pet dog that we have. So I wonder if anyone else in this community has experienced those things. And I always love to hear from folks. So put things in the comments if you're here. Let us know if you agree.
Well, the one thing that I found fascinating recently, and particularly just coming back on one of your points, emergency evacuation. So we're actually based in Plymouth. There was a bomb scare, and there was thousands of people that were evacuated, like hundreds of homes. And there was definitely, you saw on social media, people not being able to take pets with them into the spaces that were provided for humans, which, because of if they can't be created or if they can't be, contained. And it's just one of those things that actually then if you have a dog that hasn't been trained, it's not to say that they're going to be created for the rest of their life necessarily, but if they haven't been given the tools at some point in their life, that could have been made even more distressing for the fact that you might not have been able to take them with you. And that's something that's very close to home. You sort of heard of stories when the war sort of started and things like that, of people not being able to take animals with them because of that. And so it's like actually it's becoming more relevant as a tool with sort of modern day happenings.
And the climate sort of changes that are going on, I think people are having to think a little bit more about what would happen in cases of floodings and fires or significant weather events. And just like you said, it's a skill that you give them, that you can give to them, and giving them more skills they have to deal with the human world, the better that they're going to be able to cope with the human world. And so but we do have to think about it like that, like giving them a skill. I think lots of people feel like, oh, my dog's good in a crate and my dog's not good in a crate. That's just how it is. That's absolutely not how it works at all. Behavior can be shaped and changed, and we can do so much with modern behavior and training techniques. So I'm excited to I think that was our next question, wasn't it, to dive into what
Yes.
that actually looks like.
Yeah, coming to some top tips on like successful crate training, and yeah, what sort of things you'd recommend?
Yeah, actually, I'm just going to grab my bottle of water. Can you maybe kick us off and tell me a little bit about how you guys do your sizing? I'm just curious
Yeah,
because correct size and stuff is always my first step, is like get the setup right. So like
yeah,
I'm
of
sure that
course.
you guys are actually better experts than me at this. I'll be right back, but fill me in, I can hear you.
Yeah, no. So when it comes to sizing, you've got to make sure that your dog can essentially walk in at their normal kind of gait. If they've got ears, like, and particularly, for example, Loki, he's got quite pointy ears, so it's just making sure they can stand full height and still have space above them, and that they can fully turn around in their space, and that they can lie down, and completely like lie down kind of on their side as if their legs were out. So they've got that kind of full space and full movement within the crate area. And then just when we come to sizing, we say, you need to be thinking about things like if they're going to be spending, if you're putting in things like feeding drawers, the water bowl needs to be in there, that kind of thing. So it's allowing that extra space for those types of things in their space as well.
Yeah.
um, and puppies, obviously they'll be smaller and cozier, but it's just being mindful that if you are then buying for a puppy, like, does it need to get bigger, or should you, we'd often encourage people, to be honest, to crate train in a metal crate. Just for the sake, when you're investing in a bespoke piece of furniture, puppyhood is a natural chewing stage. so yeah,
Oh, one
yeah, but
100% agreed, that when we're dealing with, I mean, if anyone has, of course, I'm sure lots of you, but anyone who's joining from CCA, if you've seen the work that Pet Carpenter has done, like I've just received my, I call her a ship. She's like a boat. She's so beautiful and like roomy, like that's the bare minimum. I often find that you tend to do a little bit more room for the dogs to kind of have a little
yeah,
extra space. And I love that kind of this idea that it's not about like squidging them into the corner and just having them be in there. It's a comfortable, like really comfortable space for them. And I love my one that you've given me. It has enough room for Hero to really fully like put his
yeah,
paws out like that, and even enough room for there to be like access to a little bit of water in the corner, for example, because I like to always make sure that they have access to water, especially if they're going to be there for a while, and enough room for him to really like take a bone in there and have a chew, or like take a
yeah,
toy in there and have a play. I love that so much, that you're like, yeah, that I always see the dogs in there and I'm like, that's such a lovely size like choice for that dog. So I think that's a brilliant. So I think that's the first thing that I'm always thinking about, is the size, because I've definitely had clients before who have come to us to work on confinement comfort, and the first thing I go is like, that is absolutely far too small for this dog and we'll need to get something different. And like you're mentioning, your dogs will change size, so
yeah,
yeah, you'll have to be mindful of that. And I often do like, I start usually with, like you're saying, like a collapsible metal crate or even a fabric crate can be a
yeah,
useful place to begin. I mean, but like you said, puppies will bite through that. That's the first thing that I think about. And lastly, I think about the limits, and I like to set boundaries with myself, because if I'm going to put boundaries and restrictions around the dog, I think it's only fair that we have a two-way street here. So what are my limits around the kind of confinement?
yeah,
It depends on the dog, to be perfectly honest. Like I know some dogs who will be in there for 3 hours and you open the door and they'll be like, go away, I am sleeping still, please. But I also know some dogs who would really struggle with more than 3 hours, and at certain ages and with certain breeds that's normal. So with my clients, usually if we're ever concerned about like, how do we do this really well, we'll think about limits. So what's the maximum amount of time that we want to put them in, how often do they usually need to use the bathroom, etc. Like making sure that we have those boundaries for ourselves can be really, really useful.
yeah,
And someone actually mentioned just in the comments I just saw about how crating is illegal in Sweden, and it's not illegal to confine animals, they just have to have a certain size around them basically. And I could agree with there being ethical
yeah,
limits around confinement. I don't think that there is anything good about putting dogs in tiny boxes and leaving them there when they're in distress. And I guess that's my third thing about successful crating. You can set up the size and get it comfy. You can put limits on yourself and around like what your like maximum is going to be with them. And then we have to really take it at their pace and
yeah,
go really, really, really slowly. We might have a goal in mind, but again, this is collaborative. And the first thing I say to clients is like, do not just put them in there and close the door.
Yeah.
Good God, please do not just put them in there and close the door, especially if it's a new beautiful piece of, like, a beautiful crate that you want them to feel good about, because our dogs can learn very quickly that things are scary and unsafe even through one bad experience. And I think sometimes humans are not as good at noticing dog stress and fear as we sometimes think we are. I say that humbly as someone who spent many years without the best body language reading skills and have learned recently in the last sort of 5 years, 10 years. So don't just put them in there and shut the door. In fact, we have like a 4-step system that we go through, which we'll be making more content about. So you'll be learning and seeing more about this when it comes to confinement. The first step, we don't even want them to go in. That's the whole step. That whole step number 1 doesn't even involve them stepping in. And I actually counsel clients, act like you don't want them to go in. I know that sounds weird, but act like you don't. Act like, you know, play it cool. Like, oh, you don't want to go in there. What are you doing, you big weirdo? Oh, okay, weird. Okay, feels he's gone in there. It's a bit weird. Because sometimes pressuring them is too much. So literally the first step that we have is to create an introduction protocol. Like, how are we going to introduce them to the crate? And it depends on the dog. So for my poodle Hera, when I introduce him to the new crate, which I still haven't done yet, I've been saving it, I'm excited. It's going to be about getting him feeling confident and excited. And I'm going to try and amp him up to be like, woohoo, look how exciting it is. For our Staffordshire Bull Terrier Ash, who's 2.5 years old and a bit of a kind of, you know, pocket rocket, we're going to be calming him down and keeping him chill about the crate. So there's no one size fits all. But I do like to say to folks, like, your first step is just introduction, not even going in, just being around it, investigating it, being around the mouth, the opening, watching the door open and close, watching you put things in and out, like literally just getting to know the object. So much processing happens there. I think people want the dog to go, they go in, I'm so excited, get in the crate. And I'm like, no, just,
I think that's something really important that you mentioned about the doors, because we obviously have we have like 3 different door types. We have a hinge door, which the hinge door is probably most like what metal crates are, but then we do have a sliding door and we have an up and over door. And I think that's really important point that you make about that will be different for them from a direct replacement of a metal crate.
And even if you do have, if you're even just using a metal crate, they all sound different.
They're
all different. They kind of all move slightly differently, and these dogs really notice the difference. So, you know, introducing the space is first thing, getting them used to it from a distance, understanding the sounds it makes, the way it moves. I like to put things in the crate and close the door and let them observe, oh, there's a thing in the crate. It sounds silly, but like, they are really clever, and a lot of processing can take place without them directly having to literally go in the crate and lay down. So starting there would probably be nice. And then we have 3 other stages. The next stage is just getting them to go in and out. Can they go in and out, in and out? Maybe that's just 1 foot in at the beginning. And you'll notice if you watch anything that I do, I'm all about splitting things up into lots of little manageable steps. So we like to split things up, not lump them together. And so by introducing the space, getting them just moving in and out of the crate to start off with, then we think about settling down, step 3. And then we think about actual containment, closing the doors on them, and it being a very systematic step-by-step process. And at CCA, I have ADHD. I like to gamify everything. So I'm like, if you pass level 1, you get to go to level 2. But you got to like hit some markers to pass level 1, you know, and we take you through a process. That's our job as coaches and consultants. But the goal and the end goal is dogs that genuinely love the crate, genuinely are comfortable, genuinely seek it out in moments of distress, and in moments of uncertainty. And it's the goal that we can achieve using behavior science, to get a little bit nerdy, is we can essentially achieve classical conditioning. So we call that, or another word is Pavlovian conditioning. And if we all remember back to school, we were taught about those dogs, that guy Ivan Pavlov, he rang those bells and then fed those dogs. If you haven't heard about them, that's what he did. He did it over and over again. And then he started seeing that the dogs would salivate when they heard the bell, right? So he was able to elicit a physiological response in the dogs with a neutral stimulus, a previously neutral stimulus. The crates, the same thing can happen. They can literally become imbued with feelings of safety, with feelings of relaxation. Sometimes our staffy gets a little bit overwhelmed and overexcited, and he was bred to do sports. So he's like, let's go party. And we put him in the crate and he's like, oh, thank God. Oh.
Yeah.
I was exhausted. I really needed that. Thanks, Mom, you know. Or we have dogs who are fearful and they get in the crate and they can recover and get boosted up and feel more confident from being in. Literally, there's actual science behind this. It's not just throwing cookies at a problem. We are conditioning a conditioned emotional response to that whole environment. And as you're seeing with your own dogs, like very different ways, all these different dogs can achieve such good results. So those are just some initial thoughts, just to overview, making sure that the setup is correct, and making sure that we're putting reasonable limits around this and avoiding trauma by like pushing them in the deep end, because low key they might sink. They might not swim, and frequently they won't swim, especially if they have any bad feelings already existing around confinement. And then really thinking about this splitting up process, and obviously exploring the free content that we're going to offer together as part of this collaboration, but also knowing that if you are stuck, working with a trainer, working with a professional is a really, really good way to sort through that. We are therapists. Our job is to get into the nitty gritty of your dog's behavior and feelings, essentially, and problem solve with you. So you'll be amazed that if you do feel like you're getting stuck somewhere, that'll be my last little tip, is reach out to someone. We help. Working virtually on this is a brilliant thing to work virtually on because it's very stationary, you know. So it's not you're out and about walking in the neighborhood. It's very, very easy. So that would be my last thing. But
and just before we go on, the interesting thing, so my parents, and from the, just to sort of back up the virtual training, because I think it is quite different to probably what a lot of people expect to see from from a dog trainer. You typically go out and look for a trainer, but the super interesting thing was, so my parents with Loki, they took him to a group training session physically. They took him to see a behaviorist, but all of those situations, they were so like fabricated and not normal for him that he didn't actually kind of display any of his regular behavior. So it didn't actually kind of get them any further with helping him along the way. And it just sort of, when he's back in his normal environment, he experienced exactly the same behaviors as he was before. And so actually that's where really grateful, like Lauren has supported them, and they've seen such a difference being able to work at a pace, like an online pace, and learn and understand the psychology behind it, and then put in the things in place like over a period of time. And that's where they've really reflected on, because I've never experienced virtual training before, but they've really kind of said that actually they've seen such a difference from and experiencing both sort of models of training, as it were. So just to thank you for that as well.
That's so lovely to hear. I fully, like, I'm so glad for the pandemic, for this one reason, that it pushed me into working virtual, and I would never have believed it would work. I actually, when my staff and my colleagues at CCA were like, Krishma, I think we're going to have to go and work virtually, this is not going away, I was like, that will never work, don't be ridiculous. I'm such an ass. I was like, don't be absurd, we can't do that, that would never ever work. God, did I eat my words, because they were totally right, and it forced me to innovate. And what I realized was that especially for sensitive dogs, for whom these in-person options are just inaccessible for so many different reasons, not just for them, but for really every dog and human, especially as we've got so comfortable and literate working virtually with people, there's so much to benefit from having someone just on your shoulder helping you on a day-to-day basis. And that's a big part of our work, is that we don't just it's kind of like similar to you, actually, like it's bespoke, it's tailored, it's thoughtful, we care about the details. And similarly, I check in with my students almost every morning, and similarly, we are often working with clients for quite a long time. It's not like you go in once and we kind of promise you the world, and it's not like that. Our work is often for multiple months together, really coaching you through the behavior changes, also mindset changes, habit changes on the human and the dog side. From my experience, the integrative effects are much more powerful than in person, which is why I never went back, because I could I could go back to in person, but I'm like, nah, this is better. And I feel less burnt out because I'm seeing the humans get the skills to do this forever, and then you don't need me. I want to be fired, you know. Like, I want to be not needed anymore. That's my goal. Anyway, sorry, I went off on a tangent there, but I'm passionate about this, so whenever anyone talks about it, I'm like, all right, just everyone sit down, take that cup of tea. I'm going to be ranting for a minute.
No, it's lovely to hear. But yeah, so a question that we actually got sent across, someone said their dog freaks out when they're confined, and is that something that can be changed?
I love these questions because I think there's, first of all, as we get into the details and nuance, so much misinformation around dog behavior. You probably experienced this quite significantly being in this space and platforms like this. The amount of false, just bad science, old takes, you know, debunked takes. It's so useful to have a space like this to kind of really dive into these details and these questions. So what we're talking about with dogs who have extreme emotional responses to being confined, there's usually two potentially things going on. Number one, we're dealing with a separation / attachment issue. The issue that the dog is having is that they cannot access you as the caregiver. And separation anxiety is actually a specialty area of mine. I'm a certified separation anxiety trainer, which just means that I spent a lot of time doing many tests to kind of specialize in this area. And I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of dogs with separation anxiety. In many cases, they become phobic of confinement. So that might be the first thing that we're seeing. The second thing we might be seeing is the dog's fine being left alone, but they have barrier frustration. They have a kind of a dysregulated response to not being able to get out of something. And this is not unusual. Like, I know many, many dogs who are totally fine alone, but the minute they're in a crate, they're like, hell no. Both things are very real. And if you've experienced them with your dogs, sometimes it can really put us off using those kinds of things before. And one of the biggest myths we have around crates is that they solve separation anxiety. And lots of people have made the mistake, I think, of putting their dogs in crates because that's what trainers told them to do, and leaving them alone, and then them panicking. And separation and attachment related issues, this is genuine panic that we often are seeing from these dogs. As much as people often don't perceive dogs to have real feelings like this, they absolutely do. And I want to just double down that I don't think either of us ever want dogs to be in that state when confined.
No, not at all.
But this is something we can change in many, many cases. And I think lots of people feel like they've just got served, oh, my dog doesn't like this, so forever, there's nothing I can do about that. There absolutely is so much you can do about that. Many of the dogs in my house really hated confinement beforehand. And we have built through our system, through a very specific system at their pace, very importantly, comfort back up over a period of months, often not weeks or days. We're talking like often longer, especially if we have dogs who experienced trauma or have a phobia. That might even take multiple months, half a year, longer even, because that's the rate of recovery for phobia, anxiety conditions, extreme fear, things like that. That's normal. We wouldn't expect any other mammal to progress at a rate different to that. But if we're just seeing a little bit of frustration, a little bit of weirdness, the timelines can be much shorter. But I do like to be really honest and realistic, because that's a kindness we can give our dogs, is having the correct expectations around behavior. That way we're not putting them in situations they can't handle, and then we're not disappointed as well when they don't add up to unreasonable expectations. So it is something we can change, absolutely, in both cases. But we actually often don't use confinement with separation anxiety. That's like a myth that I like to bust. Some dogs really like, it can be really beneficial. But with dogs who have separation anxiety, meaning like they really struggle being left alone, we often start off loose in the house and then move to crates after that, if that's what we want for the dog. That's just a little separation anxiety nerdy tip there, but we don't have to go into that. But they can be.
I'm sure there's going to be so many topics that come out of this that we could delve into.
100%.
So I'm just looking at our next two questions, and I sort of feel like they sit kind of together, being, you know, when should I start crate training, and is my dog too old to be crate trained?
I'm always so surprised by the "is my dog too old" question. I get this so frequently, and I just never anticipate it. And because to me, I'm like, old dogs are brilliant. Are you kidding? Old dogs are fantastic. They're my favorite. I'm like, let's go. You'll learn easy. You're not going through the developmental chaos of puppyhood and adolescence and early adulthood. I think this like kind of, you can't teach an old dog new tricks.
Yeah.
Has really just permeated culture, but there's no real evidence behind that. The evidence, like, what you might say is that, you know, old dogs have formed habits and repeated them over and over again, so there's a reinforcement history for doing certain things. So if you have a 10-year-old dog, and every time you've come into the house they go and lay down on their bed, and that's happened every day for 10 years, okay, it might be hard to change that one habit, but to introduce them to something new and have them be able to learn and build new skills, 100%. And in fact, it's one of the things that we recommend as behavior practitioners to avoid cognitive decline in later life with dogs. So teaching dogs new things, mentally stimulating them, their capacity for learning language and communication is huge. And so using that, flexing that muscle is good. So yeah, teach old dogs all the things. And personally, I don't think there's actually I have to say, like, the only times that we would say don't start training now is if a dog is unwell or in pain. So as well as we have a dog, as long as we have a dog who's physically healthy, as long as we have a dog whose basic needs have been met. I know that sounds a bit silly, but like often our dogs can't really train unless they've had their walk, or unless they've maybe eaten a little bit. You know, sometimes when I'm using with food to train, I like to give my dogs half of the meal first, so they're not really hungry. They can use their brain and think. So as long as they're comfortable, basically, I'm always like, why are we waiting? Let's go. And you feel ready. There's nothing that should stop you. But I do like to make notes that we should start well in advance of needing to use a skill like this. So I think sometimes I struggle with requests like, I need my dog to be okay for 5 hours in a crate alone when I go to a party in 6 weeks. And I'm like, oh,
that's kind of like saying I need to lose weight for a party in 6 weeks.
I'm like, goodness me, would you go to your doctor and be like, I require this bone to be healed in 5 days, please, because I have an event? Like, I cannot make things happen. I'm not a magician, and neither are you. And your dogs are living, breathing creatures who have their own inner lives. We can't force it, but we can use behavior science, what we know about these dogs, and just, you know, smart parenting techniques basically to speed up the process as much as possible. So I always say to folks, if you are on a time crunch, I need you to accept that we might not be there, like that might not be able to do that. Like there's a potential that won't happen, and I'm not going to lie to you and say otherwise. And anyone who is, I'd be super concerned about. That is a big red flag for me. Just like a therapist who says I can cure your anxiety in 2 weeks, you'd be like, oh, can you? Wow, that's amazing. How do you do that? It's not possible necessarily. But yeah, I like that's a really good one. I always just, the idea of dogs being too old to be trained to me is just so, I'm just like, I love old dogs. I think they're the best.
So obviously you've got extensive experience and a number of years of experience behind you. So do you have any sort of particular examples that come to mind from as a trainer, like when the introduction of a crate has benefited?
Honestly, countless. I can't really think of enough. I could go on and on and on and on. But I think really importantly, I've had many experiences of clients who have been really reluctant
Mm-hmm.
and who I've very slowly and gently kind of introduced the idea and then been able to bring it in a way that always they felt comfortable with. And I've had clients have these big kind of turnarounds where they were like, whoa, I really didn't want to have to put her in a crate because it felt mean, but she now sleeps for the appropriate amount of time a day. So there's one case that brings to mind, a client I had in Vancouver whose dog was super athletic, super smart, and obsessed with the Guardian. And this dog would not rest. She would just follow the Guardian around constantly, making sure that she was okay, what's going on here, what's going on there. And when I told her that our dogs should be sleeping between 16 to 18 hours a day, her jaw just dropped. She was like, what? Yeah. Are you kidding? Yeah. Like, that is not what happens with my dog. And I was like, well, maybe that's why they're struggling with noises. And the minute they leave the house, they're on edge and hyperactive, and they go from 0 to 100 quite frequently and can't handle their excitement. And rather, I think lots of trainers would say, we need to train the dog to go to a place or to heel or to down. And I was like, no, this dog needs to sleep. Yeah. Like, she needs to get her sleep schedule better. And the only way to do that, she's like me. If I'm downstairs, I'm talking to my flatmates, I'm what's on the TV, I'm looking out the window. I'm like this dog, right? And sometimes I need to take myself to my room and go like, you know, chill for a minute. And I think it was after a few weeks, she started to realize and go like, wow, okay. But it was very important, and it always is, that we went through this step process very, very systematically. How do you feel about the space and us moving around it? Cool. How do you feel going in it? Amazing. How do you feel laying down in it and relaxing? The dog went, I feel great. And then we went, how do you feel about us closing the door? And the dog was like, cool, I'm gonna have a nap. That's what it should look like. So I guess that's just one that springs to mind. But I'm really thinking about my own dogs. I have a lot of dogs in my family. I have my family of dogs, and I think they're a really useful kind of array of different benefits that they've seen. So I could literally talk about thousands of dogs from around the world, but even just within my personal household, our sport line Staffordshire Bull Terrier, 2.5 years old, that dog did not stop moving. It would be up the curtains on the ceiling. He'd be digging in the yard. He'd be hunting mice. He did not know how to relax. If anyone came into the room, he would, when he was jump and mouth on them. And it's normal for an 8-month-old Staffordshire Bull Terrier who's also living in London and doesn't have, fields right outside their home. It's normal for them sometimes to do that stuff. And rather than being all bruised and having my clothes torn up, and then me getting very angry and frustrated because using these sorts of actually a big combination of containment. So we use crates for him, but we also use like baby gates to like block off areas. We use like confinement in a bedroom. Like we have like little rooms, and sometimes I look at like a chihuahua in one of your crates and I'm like, well, that's kind of the size equivalent of Ash in the small bedroom. Like, there's not that big a difference between the two. But all of these things have been like absolutely huge. And for him at 2.5 years old, he has dog aggression in both of his lines, his family lines going back, because he's a sport bred dog. And so technically, when we got him, his breeder was like, I'm not so sure about him being in a house with lots and lots of other dogs. These staffies don't tend to do that well because they're extremely tenacious. They're spicy. They will guard their good bones and their food and stuff like that. So it's been able to create between all of our dogs harmonious relationships. Where we have 4 dogs in the house in a bungalow in London, and we are able to have them all have no conflicts. They eat their food in their little safe spaces. When they need a break from each other, I can be like, Ash, can you go to your crate? Here, it looks like he wants to smack you in the face. You're being annoying. You know what I mean? These are tools that we have. And so for Ash, it's been this like boundary setting. You are a big dog, an exuberant dog. You have a lot of power and strength, and being able to kind of have some control over that. So now he's 2, we're opening up his world a lot, and he's hanging out a lot more. And because he hasn't spent the last 2 years being an arsehole, sorry for swearing, but because he hasn't spent the last 2 years practicing all of these naughty behaviors, now he's 2, he's like, okay, so we all chill. and I
Yeah.
don't do all these things that the humans don't like. And so it's been a game changer for him, from that perspective. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have two dogs in our home who are really fearful, one of whom
Yeah.
has thunderstorm phobia. And for her, that's the only time for her when the crates become a lifesaver, because she's a Romanian street dog, and tends to not be into crates as much as most of our other dogs, because she wasn't introduced to them as early. She's still totally happy in one, but she's like one of those dogs who's like, I'll take it or leave it.
Yeah.
But when there are thunderstorms, she's like, find me the nearest one right now, let me in. She will like wait
Yeah.
and ask us to let her in. And so for many dogs, they become this like sanctuary in these acute moments of fear. And similarly for Hira, my poodle, for him it's been guests in the home and a lot of hustle and bustle and movement. He hates it, and I've literally seen him at this point be stressed about something, like I don't know, a new guest stood up and made a big noise, and I see him and he goes, I'm just going to go to my room, and he just like goes to his crate and lays down as like another option for him rather than fighting or defending himself. So these are just absolutely, like, I would never be able to have these dogs without these tools, in my opinion. Like it wouldn't be an option. They're all very sensitive. You know, Hera barks and lunges and has bitten people. Emily, similarly, former Romanian free living dog, has such a history of fear and reactivity. And Ash is actually the most confident guy I've ever seen in my life, but that can also be problematic when you have a big muscly guy, especially within the current climate around muscly dogs. So there's honestly, I think in some cases it's not necessary, but in many it's actually such a useful tool and a thing that can be used to keep them in homes, honestly, without any fallout to their behavior. So sometimes I see that argument used around like, we need to punish the dog because if we didn't punish the dog, they would be euthanized. That's not what I'm saying here. No, we're not doing a horrible thing. The idea is that this is only positive, so there's no fallout. And if ever there were stress around the crate, that's where a professional would come in to help navigate and make sure that the dog is comfortable.
And that brings us to a point that I think is really, like, we should touch on. Like, have you ever seen any negative outcomes from the crate space?
Yeah,
because I think that is,
this is absolutely has to be not just touched on, but probably like to spend a little minute, because I absolutely have seen negative outcomes of using a crate space. I'm not even going to try and pretend that that's not the case. If it is used as essentially a cage to just put an animal in when they are overwhelmed, that's one thing that people do. The dog's behaviors are too big and they just want to kind of stop it. If that's happening over and over again, I will have a problem with that, because we don't want to be putting animals in situations where they're panicking and then just confining them to kind of panic in that crate. That's not an option for me, and I would always recommend against that. So if it's, in some cases we do have to just like confine a dog for safety in a pinch and emergency situation, but that's never the plan. I'm never like, we'll have the party and the dog will freak out, we'll just put him in the crate in the corner and he'll be, absolutely not. That's not what I think we should do. And I also see it used as a punishment. I see confinement used as a punishment quite frequently in an attempt to teach the dog that something they just did was wrong. So a dog bathrooms in the house, or destroys something, or steals an item, or just whatever it is, and the other human goes, you did this wrong, I'm putting you in the crate to punish you for that thing. One, I have never experienced that actually working functionally as a way to teach the lesson to the dog. I don't think humans are quite quick enough for the dog to make the immediate associations. They usually just think, from my experience, the humans, they associate it with the person rather than with the behavior that they just did. So they go, oh, mum will be mean to me, not this has happened because I chewed the carpet. They're just like, mum's a dick. That's the lesson they learn. So one, it doesn't work. But two, it's then going to build a whole bunch of negative feelings around that space, which is not what we want. We want them to feel good about the space. If they don't feel good about it, it doesn't help us. So definitely not using it to punish or suppress behavior anyway. I want to just stay well away from that. And I've mentioned briefly like some people do recommend it for separation anxiety cases, and there are a small proportion of dogs for whom we do go in with crating, but often if we're seeing alone time phobia, like a dog who panics when left alone, so we'll often see vocalizations, whining, barking, sometimes panting, pacing, destruction, peeing and pooping, naughty behavior when you're away, that kind of stuff. That often falls under the umbrella of separation anxiety. And this kind of like, just put them in a crate and let them cry it out, and maybe give them like some peanut butter in a Kong, and that will solve it scenario. That for me can be very damaging. It can cause confinement trauma events for the dog, which then leads to crate phobia, which then further builds this discomfort and fear around confinement. And so it's really about judging and having discernment. When is a good and appropriate time to use it, and when is it not appropriate? And if you're unsure, that's where a professional comes in, right? Like, it's very common for folks to go, oh, I'm not an expert in reading my dog's anxiety signs in the crate. I don't know how much whine. Is it normal for them to whine for 30 seconds, or is it abnormal? Is what's okay, what's not okay? There is no one rule or one size fits all. But I often say to my clients, like, if you're unsure, take videos of what you're doing to start off with. If you are practicing, you know, introducing your dog to the crate or trying to practice some time in there or whatever it is you're doing, video yourself. You can always look back, see it again, because we miss a lot of things the first time. And just having a bit of reverence around the fact that we are actually really important in their lives. What we do to them is really important. How we communicate with them is really important to them and to you. I know that to everyone who's watching this, because you're watching this, so clearly it is important to you. And so having some time to think around it and being mindful about how you approach this. Like, if you are unsure, get a professional involved if that's within your resources. If you're not, like, watch as much free stuff as you can online, and video yourself, watch yourself back, show your friends, what do you think, you know, like literally a little bit of that around these problems can avoid negative outcomes and avoid these kind of unfair creating scenarios that can then really damage the relationship between the dog and the human, and then damage your future chances of being able to use confinement successfully with the dog. So I think that's most of my negative outcomes from the crate space.
No, and I think the interesting one is just, it's sort of coming back round to really you having an awareness of your dog and what they're sort of needing in that moment and taking it at their pace. And I think that's something that's sort of really come through with the whole of our conversation today.
And that's exactly why and how we've shaped all of our services. So when Loki and your family took our Feisty Friday program, our goal was to give them the skills to know when Loki's saying this is too much. Because so often I think miscommunication, confusion, conflict, and damage to the relationship can arise from the humans just not quite knowing when to set the boundaries, right?
The most interesting thing is, even before they came and did some training with you, just even things like they're so aware now to like remove him from situations where he's getting stressed out, as opposed to what you'd normally go, oh, we'll try and, if you allow him to be almost flooded by it and treat him as he's doing that, he'll get used to it. But it was just those types of things that have seen his behavior just massively, like, just he's become so much calmer because you're not kind of just over engaging him all of the time and all of these things that are stressing him out. And I love the fact that my parents are coming back to me and being like, we've learned this, we've learned this, we've learned this. And like, they're becoming, you know, like you say, you're enabling your sort of clients to become, and the guardians of, you know, to become the kind of the foundation of knowledge, which really empowers them to kind of continue to work together with their dog to kind of have a really successful kind of relationship going forward.
100%. And it's moving away from this idea that you can, you know, sit in a room for 1 hour with this kind of guru dog trainer and magically transform your dog's behavior. No, that's not how it works. Like, you're going to be learning about your dog's body language. We're going to be watching videos of your dog and saying, oh, I think when he does that, that might mean this. And then you're going to start to rewire your brain so that your behavior changes and then their behavior changes as a result. And it's very, very cool to see. And I love that. I love that they've had that experience and hopefully feel empowered, because that's our goal, is to empower the dogs, to empower the humans. And I love having the nuance around that conversation, because it feels wrong to confine when we're trying to empower, but actually boundaries, when done well and non-violently and cooperatively, help us form closer attachments, right? That's how we build secure attachments, and we can build secure attachments with each other and with our animals. And this is just one of the nuances, I think, to that overall conversation. So I'm just really excited that we got to have this on your platform, because I know that this debate has been raging in the comment section.
Raging indeed, and I'm sure it will. I'm sure it will continue.
Well,
but that's okay.
I want to encourage that myself. I was going to say, like, if folks do have questions after seeing this and you want to put them in the comments, I'll do my best to jump in and answer. And I'm sure Jen will have the the sort of perspective on it as well, because I think the conversation needs to be had. I'm always excited by people's, but what about this? I'm like, come on, let's go. I want to learn. I want to, and
definitely.
And I want to do the best for the dogs at all time, which I know is the same for you guys, which is why I think we have these kind of meshing shared values, which is brilliant.
Yeah. So, Karishma, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I'm really excited about what we've got coming, and just the fact that we've been able to, like you say, you've been able to join us and launch in our space. So
it has been wonderful. And I think I'm gonna just let everyone know as well that if anyone is watching this wanting more support and advice, if they're maybe thinking about getting beautiful furniture from the Pet Carpenter and want to make sure that you're introducing it correctly, no matter where you are in the world, our services are completely accessible. Like I said, 16 countries and counting, so you could be country number 17 if you live somewhere obscure. And if you want more advice, you can email us at info@calmcanineacademy.com, or just DM us on Instagram and we will get back to you. And you can quote TPC 10, so TPC the Pet Carpenter 10, for 10% off your offers with us, whatever you end up doing with us. So we, as part of our collaboration, you'll be able to save a little bit of money, which is lovely. And I'm excited to hear from folks about their confinement training questions over the next few weeks.
Yeah, amazing. Well, I know there's been some comments, so what we'll do is we'll come back to those after, and we'll make sure we go through and answer them. But thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you, Karishma. I've really enjoyed it this evening. I had
a lovely chat.
Yeah, just been really insightful. So thank you so much. And watch the space, because there'll be more coming soon. All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, my love.